Este o adevărată plăcere și în același timp un lucru extraordinar faptul că astăzi îl avem alături de noi pe John Howard, unul din cei mai buni specialiști în ce înseamnă proces de selecție și, în general, în consultanță în resurse umane. Un om extraordinar și un specialist care poate fi luat ca și reper în tot ceea ce înseamnă, să spun așa, expertiza sau excelența, mai bine spus, în resurse umane. Welcome, John. Please. It was only good words about it. It's okay. După cum vedeți, avem costume identice, dar nu e adevărat. Ne-am uitat cu foarte mare atenție. It's a couple of our suits. Ăla e un neam, ăsta e un alt neam. Ăsta e făcut aici, ăla e făcut în state. Pe cuvântul meu, diferă culoare. Cine vede două culori diferite? Mâna sus. Ok. Cine vede o culoare? One color. Ok. Avem, uitați să vă spun, dar acum avem și momentul. Avem un abonament făcut la o clinică privată. Cei care aveți probleme medicale, nu e nicio problemă, e din partea profeții de regiune. Ok. Welcome, John. Thank you very much for this long introduction. Thank you very much for explaining it. Please.
Bună dimineața! You didn't know I was multilingual, right? Spanish, let's see, buenas noches. Italian, Irish, good night.
Good night.
Irish is noapte bună.
Oh,
Noapte bună.
Yeah.
Good night.
The last presentation had an image that was very real for me, and I kind of wonder how it resonates with you. As people in HR, do you feel like you're clawing for that last 2.567 centimeters? Are you? Are you working that hard for it? Is it uphill? Is it uphill? Before I actually get started on my slides, I'd like to tell an HR audience that I understand some things about where you are. Let me see your hand if you've ever seen a line on the company budget that said profit from HR. And raise your hand, please, if you've ever seen a line that said expense of HR. Okay. If you will pay attention today and implement this program, clawing for every inch, you will never again be considered just a line item expense. I will show you how to put into dollars what you're doing for the company. Is that fair? Is that interesting? Should I go home? Okay, we're going to talk about best practices in selection.
Little bad.
Somebody. I can talk without the slides, but you won't get as much.
It's not working because of you.
It must be it. It's my aura.
You broke my...
It's my aura. I do that when I get close to your computer, too. That's what I did. I swear. I call this finding your perfect diamond, and you'll see why. First, I want to talk about what we think of as the perfect hire. Has anybody ever made the perfect hire? Is that something you'd like to do? You think you have at least once, right? Not very often. Okay. The best of the best and the real losers all together are only about 10% of who you hire. You know, I mean, that's just the realities of life. The quality of the rest determine how your company does. Does that make sense to you? It's the 90% that make the company work or not work. You can divide the 90% into 3 different buckets. And you've seen other numbers, 80-20 and 90-10 and so on, but it's really easy. Just divide them into thirds. Okay? The best, the not quite best, and the least best. We don't want to call them bad, they're just least best. The best. This is what they do for you. That's who we want to hire. Right? Okay? The next group, when we hired them, we thought they were going to be great. But something didn't quite work out. And you might promote them if you don't have somebody better to promote. Okay? The least best? Well, somehow we did something wrong, or we wouldn't have hired them in the first place. This is what they look like, but they underproduce. But when you hired them, they look like this. We all thought they were going to be good. By the way, within the U.S., I moved from a very wet state, Oregon, to a very dry state 9 years ago, and I've been thirsty ever since. So I will drink during this presentation, and this is water. When you decided to hire them, they had all these things. What went wrong? Well, at least in my view, your system let you down. If you had a better system, it wouldn't have happened to you. So what's the impact on your business when that happens? Well, you can actually put numbers to it pretty easily. Calculate your revenue per employee. How many of you have ever done that? Okay. Everybody should, and they should do it regularly. What's the revenue each employee produces? And it's just a broad number. You take the total revenue of the company and divide it by the number of people. Okay? Once you've done that, get with your CFO and find out what your contribution margin is. That's the amount of profit, gross profit, that each employee produces as a percentage of the revenue. Okay? And we're just going to pull 30% out of the air for a company whose RPE is 400,000. Multiply your average profit per new employee. This is what you should expect from the new person you hire. Okay? If they're doing the same kind of job and are doing it at least as well as your average employee. All right, now let's divide those. Now, there's your total. Generate 120,000. Let's divide those by groups. Assume that the top group is just 20% more impactful than the middle group. They're probably a lot more than that, but let's assume that it's only 20%. And as it follows, this means that the difference in profit between the bottom and top group is $48,000 per person. Big number. If you can replace one person in the bottom group with one that goes into the top group, you've just made the company $48,000. Is that more or less than they paid you? Do it 20 times a year, and you're $1 million. So tell me a little bit about the size of your companies. How many of you in here have companies with less than 50 people? How many between 50 and 200? More. How many 200 and 500? And over 500. Okay, so we've got a lot of bigger companies. Many of you have the opportunity to do that $1 million. One of my favorite quotes of all time from our Mr. Report: perfection is a direction, not a place. Now, even though I'm talking about selecting the perfect employee, we all know that either they don't exist or we're not likely to find it. But if we can simply get better at what we do, we can have a huge dollar impact on our company. What's our normal hiring process? Well, normally it looks like this. We do what I call exclusionary job postings, and I'll talk about those later. We limit our pool. We review and interview, and what do we look for? Skills and experience. What else do you look for? Yeah. companies they were working at, so you're checking references. That's the third party. And then what do? We decide. We select. That's our current process. Why do we do it this way? Because we always have. Not because it makes a heck of a lot of sense, just because that's the way it's always been done. There is a better way, and that's what we're going to talk about the rest of my time here. By the way, Eric, wave at me when I have about a half hour on it, please.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. This is a better way to select, I believe. Expand the pool. Get as many people to apply as you can. Now that's a recruiter's nightmare, trying to look through 500 resumes, right? So you've got to have a system that makes that easy. Get online. How many of you have internet-based hiring systems? Just a few. Are most of the rest of you working with email resumes or paper resumes? Or paper applications? If so, you're wasting a lot of what could be your productive time. Second step is once you've got lots and lots of applicants, assess everyone on everything you can. Get as much information about them as you can. You want to know, are they good people? Are they good employees? You want to know, do they fit the job you're trying to put them in? You want to know if they have the skills that we already kind of halfway good at. And I'll show you something called the exceptional reference email that will make your life a lot easier. Once you've done that assessment, you review all the information and you interview them. And you look for the things that you do now in interviews, but you come in with a much better set of information because you've done that assessment process. Look at what challenges they're going to face in that new job. What's going to derail them before you put them in the job. And finally, you select, but you select based on a much better set of information. It's not that radically different, but it's much, much, much more effective. Why try to make that perfect hire? What's your motivation right now? It's got to be internal if they're not paying you for it. Okay? You want to be as good as you can be. And there's nothing wrong with that motivation. But I think there are some other ways that we can define it to other people in the company. Because ultimately, if you're going to change your hiring system, you're going to have to make a case to somebody who's going to say okay, unless you're in a very unusual HR role. Xerox was looking for workers to staff call centers, and they always looked for people who had done that before. The computer program told them that experience didn't matter in their jobs. Had absolutely no predictable effect. What they discovered is personality determined who was going to work and who was not going to waste the $5,000 they spend on training worldwide on every call center employee. Now Xerox, you've heard of Xerox, right? Xerox is not a small company. Xerox has 48,700 call center jobs around the world. In just 6 months, they cut attrition by a fifth using a personality assessment, and it now leaves all of its hiring to the assessment. The HR person doesn't need to get any extra information from the interview. That translates into $16 million for Xerox. Again, huge numbers. Fairly small effect. A smaller company that may be closer to home for many of you who have smaller companies, Richfield Waste is a garbage collection company. Pretty simple, straightforward sort of business. They have 200 garbage collectors that work for them. And they're looking for ways to screen out people who might get hurt, and worse yet, if they got hurt, abuse the workers' comp system. And I don't know how Europe's workers' comp works. If somebody gets injured, but my guess is it costs you a lot if somebody gets injured on the job. Richfield started using an honesty integrity test, looking for good people, and cut their workers' comp claims by 68%. And one of the problems you'll have when you first institute an assessment program is you'll have managers who don't believe in it and who try to go around it and who sometimes succeed. I always tell people, if you have an assessment program and you choose to go counter to the assessment, make sure you record how that works out for you. because it'll make the economic case. That's what they're saving. 200 employees, 300 grand a year. A lot of savings. What if you're a really small business? I often have prospects talk to me. I sell this stuff. I have prospects talk to me and they say, well, we're so small we can't afford that. Well, if you're small, you just can't afford to make that hire. It can kill your company. Let me show you something. Let's assume that this is how the productivity of your employees spreads out. And this is fairly common, that the best person you have will produce 3 times as much as the worst person. The worst person probably just barely hanging on to their job. Right? What happens if instead you have number 1 and number 5 producing at that top level? Well, look at them side by side, you can see that one choice is an extra $500,000 a year in production. So a small company really has huge impact of just one good or bad hire. What if you get it right? That's what the stats say. In sales, it's much more pronounced than that. We've seen this go as high as 15 to 1. And here's our goal again, is to get you the kind of employees that become top producers. Here's a sales force. We took a look at the entire sales force on an assessment. We had their sales numbers. We divided them, we made a pattern for top producers and matched them to it. Then we divided the groups into those that matched the pattern at 80% or above versus those that matched the pattern at 70% and below. We cut out the middle. The difference in production was 900% in sales production. Just 10 points on the assessment. And obviously, that would have a huge effect on the company's overall sales if you could hire more people like the top producers. Aberdeen Group did a study of best practices, and they were looking at, did best practice companies use assessments and what results did they get? And they found that they affected all 4 of those things, always in a positive direction. So Aberdeen Group's best-in-class companies are companies that use assessments based on those stats. So how do you improve your chances of getting it right? Because all that's just fine, but now this is my company. This is your company. How do you make it better? First, open the floodgates. Expand your applicant pool. I can't tell you any one simple thing to do that will have more impact than if you can get more applicants for your jobs. Get as many as you can, sort them out later. And to do that, of course, you have to have some efficient tools. Nobody wants to read 1,200 resumes. The analogy I use is the diamond cutters. If I'm a master diamond cutter sitting with my light and my glasses at my bench in Amsterdam, I don't have somebody pre-sort the diamonds for me. I'm the guy. I can tell if they're better. So there's no point in me having some schoolboy sort them out for me. Just give me all the diamonds. That's what you want to do in getting your applicants. Get all the diamonds. Don't let things that you don't know about limit you. You make assumptions about what you need and what you don't need, you start limiting your pool. Online hiring systems. Now I'm very big on this because I've watched the statistics on the companies that we moved into online hiring. Southeastern Freight Lines is a fairly large trucking company in the United States. And at the time we started working with them, they had trucks sitting idle because they didn't have drivers for them. And they couldn't hire competent licensed drivers fast enough to keep those trucks on the road. They had plenty of business. They could have shipped more goods if they had had those trucks running. We took them online with an integrated system, and these are the things that they found. Time to hire cut by 40%. That's like getting extra employees. That's like getting extra trucks on the road. It increased their number of applications by 500%. And they discovered that Sundays, when naturally the HR department usually was closed, happened to be the day they got the most applications. Because at least in the US, truck drivers are generally home on Sunday. That's when they have time to look for a new job. And the results are obvious. Their trucks are on the road. And hiring managers, that's you guys, can actually concentrate on doing other things, not just hiring. Write a job posting that works for you, not against you. Let me show you a kind of a standard job posting. This is a traditional ad. And I've actually looked at these kind of all over the world, and they all go about the same way. Number one, you want it as short as possible so it doesn't cost a lot of money. And number two, you want to limit your pool by requiring stuff. Okay? Now that's a traditional ad. Here's one that's worse. Yet most HR people, when I survey them, think it's a better ad. Why? Because we've been trained to look for skills by reducing our applicant pool. Never mind, get into a why. This actually was an ad that one of my clients was running. There we go. We wrote this ad for him instead. In translation, Kate, if you could read that to him, that might help some of the folks who aren't reading English particularly well. Again, the goal was to drive lots of applications. And there aren't very many people that are going to apply for this job that don't have the CPA that you have to have. Do you ever see ads like that? Okay. Not very many. What do you think the results were? In that case, yes. But we actually had a companion ad with it. But in that first ad, this is how they had done. They spent a lot of money even though it was a short ad. Okay? With the ad that we wrote, this is what they had. And particularly if you're online, consider how it's going to look online. Because most online job boards that pick up your ad will only pick up the first 2 lines. And those 2 lines better sell somebody on clicking on the link, or you won't see their application. Widen your view. What do I mean by that? Well, remember I said we tend to do it the way we do it because we've always done it, right? That's how we look at the world of applicants. Okay? Now, if that's how you look at the world of applicants, obviously you miss a lot of opportunity. There's lots of fish out there in the ponds. And particularly with Duru's starting statistic where you've got half of the jobs unfilled, there's no downside to increasing your applicant pool, and there's a lot of upside. Where do your applicants live? Do you know? Where do they come from? You tried to? That's good. That's good. We had a call center in Salt Lake City that, when I first talked to them about using assessments, said we cannot use assessments because we get 1.2 applicants for every open job. We can't be selective. We have to hire whoever's there. Well, we did a study for that company, and it turned out that 81% of their applicants came from 7 zip codes. There are 132 zip codes within 45 minutes of their front door. And frankly, it translated into lazy recruiters doing things the way they always had. Once we showed them this, they started booting the recruiters out the door to go places and talk to people. And if they saw everybody at their desk, they knew something was wrong. And they changed this pattern. And eventually they were able to use assessments because they were getting 12 and 13 applications per open seat. Now in selection, what is most important? Well, first, let's get good employees. How do we define good employees? What makes a good employee? And I think most of us will have little trouble with the notion that these are all kind of important things. Okay? And as I tell people, the best salesman in the world is not a good hire if he's going to steal from you, not show up for work, and use drugs. So we may as well get that out of the way first before we start looking at his sales qualities. Here's a manufacturer who made 80 hires over about 6 months. This again is one of our clients. And they tracked the average hours missed per week in the first 6 months of employment. Before they had the assessment, the average was 2 hours. 2 hours per week. That seem like a big number? Afterwards, it was half an hour. Well, what does that do in dollars? And again, this is how you sell this to your CFO. At $120,000, which is what we started with, gross profit per employee per year, 2 hours per week, turns out to be $6,000 in lost production per employee, per new hire. And a half is obviously 1/4 of that. Every time you hire somebody with the assessment program, you're putting another $4,500 on the company's bottom line. Not bad for an assessment that costs about $25. We have a regional grocery chain that you'll see appearing in several of my case studies today because, unlike most of my clients, they track everything. They've got the metrics. And so it's fun to work with them because I can actually see what's working and what's not. 800 employees, 8 stores, like any grocery, many entry jobs, entry-level jobs. They adopted the Step 1 Survey 2, an honesty and integrity test that we provide, and there are others. If we just apply the manufacturer's numbers to the grocer for simplicity, they save $250,000 a year just in worker time, even though they've reduced their turnover by 60%. And this is one of the challenges in doing hiring process improvement. If you do it right, some of your base numbers will go down enough that it's hard to show the improvement on the other side. The problem for me, because after 2 years of working with us, they don't need to buy as many assessments. Okay, integrity. We'll have to do what? This is theft investigations, before and after assessments. Now, this particular store doesn't launch a formal investigation unless they have losses of $5,000 or more, either proven or suspected. And the average cost of their investigation is $3,500. There's another $250,000, just in the reduction of the number of theft investigations they had to do. How about safety and accidents? Well, direct cost of accidents, and again, these are U.S. figures. I suspect yours, if anything, are higher. These are usually insured costs, and you can figure them at about $10,000, but obviously if you have more, you pay more for your insurance. Direct costs, though, are just the beginning. Indirect costs, which are not insured, and which come straight out of the company budget, are 2 to 10 times that for every lost time accident. Do these numbers seem plausible in your opinion? Indirect costs include things like this. And this. And this. And this. And they probably go well beyond there. But there's at least those things. over. If you're in a business that's risky, where the risks are obvious, mining, commercial fishing, those kinds of things, safety is kind of at the top of your mind most of the time in HR. If you're in a business like groceries, does risks seem like it's that big a deal? I mean, how safe is groceries? This is the number of lost time incidents before the assessments and after 3 years of assessments. They went from 65 incidents per year to 30. You take those numbers we were looking at, $700,000. This is all from one $25 assessment. What's the effect on turnover and tenure? Are those important things to you? Turnover, tenure? Okay. Positive effects of longer tenure are things that people have been talking about for a long time. You have fewer production errors. It lowers your warranty expense, you get better response from your customers. Usually there's improved safety. In the U.S., it's pretty dramatic statistics. After 1 year on the job, they're 50% less likely to get injured. Reduced training costs, obviously. Better acculturation. This is a subtle one. Most people don't put a dollar figure to it, but this is because they know how it's done here. This is the way we do it. By the way, you're seeing me sweat profusely. I'm warning you, if you come to one of my seminars in the U.S., bring your jacket. The temperature will be 20 degrees Fahrenheit, lower than this. This is their turnover after years of assessments. And that's fairly difficult. This is not an exceptional case at all. And we managed to increase by 50% the number of people who stayed over 2 years. And that's a huge effect. Huge reduction in all those things we just listed. By the way, how many of you track early hire failure as opposed to turnover? Okay. You need to. Turnover is a lousy metric. It's one that everybody talks about. It's one that everybody knows. But the fact is, if you look at turnover today, you're looking at the accumulated effects of everything that happened from the time your longest tenured employee was hired to now. And if you make a change, and it's a good one, you may not even be able to detect it for 3 years. Okay? So track this. 60 days, 180 days, a year, or 2 years. And you'll see the effects of what they're doing now. I deliberately omitted a couple things that we can measure because in some countries you can't do that. In Canada, for example, our great neighbor to the north, we cannot ask substance abuse questions because substance abuse is considered a medical issue. And work ethic is so culturally determined that you have to be very careful to standardize your measure on the local culture if you're going to measure work ethic. Future of assessments. Where are assessments going? Well, these are just some of the things we're working on being able to measure right now. And if we succeed, wouldn't that be interesting for you? Okay, let's look at the total payoff for that little grocery chain. Attendance, about $250,000. Theft, about $250,000. Early hire failures, about $800,000. Total bottom line increase from that $25 assessment every year. And the effects are cumulative. If you're continually hiring better people, you get more payoff over time. Annual cost of the program has been $31,000. There's your ROI. Would that interest your CFO? Would they care if you could give them $42 back for everyone that they invested? I guarantee if you walk in the front door with a piece of machinery that will give them 3-to-1, they'll buy it. So 42-to-1 is pretty spectacular. There's almost no place that you can get the kind of return on investment that you can get out of HR, but we haven't been trained to document it and produce it. And again, that ignores lots of other things that are probably positive. should come with it if you can produce those kinds of returns. How do we measure for selection? Right now, we tend to do those first four things, right? How many of you actually do simulations, work simulations? Just a couple of them, okay? In the U.S., simulations have been kind of a trend that's beginning to reverse because, like any other measurement where you evaluate by having an observer say how did it work out, there's a lot of variability between observers, and it defeats the purpose of the measure. These are the things we can do that are objective, that aren't dependent on who's evaluating. And all of those things are positive contributions to your end goal of getting that kind of performance. If you look at how we look at resumes and applications, what's the quality of the information? Sherm did a study in the U.S. The majority of people extend the truth, as the attorneys say, on their application of their resume. And in my language, this is what they lie about. Is that kind of scary? You know what's even scarier? You're looking at their resume, you have no idea which things they lie about. All you know is that some of it's probably not right. Now, I don't have any directly comparable statistics to Europe, but I did a quick search on faked curriculum vitae and lying on application, and these came up. So I suspect we have about the same problem. How do you like the one about the aircraft cleared to fly with an unqualified engineer? Okay, so we don't have great information when all we have is the resume or the application. It's a place to start, that's all it is. So then we do our general interview, or maybe many of you are doing behavioral interviews. Frankly, statistically, they're only marginally better. In fact, I sometimes ask, why do we still do it? But I don't have a single client who has agreed to simply get away from the interview altogether like Xerox did in their call centers. If you want a good review of what's wrong with them, and he says almost everything, there's his online article. And remember, you're going to have these slides. What do you think your odds are of making a good hire if interviews are your primary tool? Across all of the companies that we've studied, it's about 1 in 8. You would just as well if you stood outside the hotel and just counted it when you got to age that you're hired. It's not a very good statistic. Simulations. Simulations are interesting. They have the problems I've already talked about. At least they're usually job related. And job relatedness is something that's always questionable in some of the techniques people use. But the scoring tends to be subjective. What about reference and background checks? Someone mentioned reference and background checks. How good a tool is that here in the EU? Not very good? Okay, if you only take one thing away today, this is the gem that you're going to love when you try it. It's called the Exceptional Reference Email. And I'll give you the text of the actual email. Again, if you can read it in translation, thank you. Did you ever try something like this? Will you? What if you send out 10 of those emails on a given candidate and nobody replies? You'll know something, won't you? And again, at the bottom is the reference if you want to look at the article. Okay, then you can do what I advocate. You can do formal assessments. And we can start with skills. How many of you use skills assessments? Like typing, Word, a few. assessments have some advantages. There are lots of providers, lots of folks make them. They tend to be relatively cheap, and they have very strong validation. They really do, in fact, tell you whether these people know whatever it is you're trying to assess them on. How many of you have ever been lied to about somebody who said they were an expert on computer programs? People come in and want a job with us, and they say, I'm really good with Word and excellent on Excel, I can do macros, and you put them through the skill test, and they are miserable failures. The problem is they don't know how bad they are. They're not lying to me, they just don't understand what it would be like to really be an expert. As I say, they're inexpensive. So they're a good tool, but they are quite limited in what they do, and they're certainly not very flexible or customizable. In America, we hire for skills and we fire for fit. Do you do that here? You know, again, we assess all the skills, the guy's perfect, you put him in the job, and 6 months later you're saying goodbye, and boy, am I glad he's gone. And it's because we hired him for skills, but he did not fit the job or the company. You can do formal assessment of attitudes. Almost all of the honesty and integrity tests are attitude tests. And they can include these and more. And again, your goal here is to get a good employee in the classic sense. It's absolutely critical, if you're going to use an honesty and integrity test, that it have a distortion measure. According to Warren Buffett, when you look for people to hire, you look for three things: integrity, intelligence, and energy. Why? Because if you only get 2 out of 3 and you lack integrity, their energy and intelligence will kill you. Back to distortion. It's critical. Why is it critical? Well, if you don't have it, you don't know what the information you have in front of you means. Is it a reflection of reality? Is this what the person really is? Or perhaps, is it a reflection of what they think you want to see? Or is it what they wish they were? And there's a big difference for you in which of those it is you're seeing. So you need a distortion measure. If you have a distortion measure, candidates tend to be very, very consistent. Whatever they've done on the assessment, they're likely to have done on every piece of information they've given you. They put a lot of positive spin on the assessment, they'll put a lot of positive spin on their application and on their references. They'll have carefully selected only people who will say very good things about it. If you're going to do perfect hiring, you might want to measure all of these things. But is it practical? No. Often people ask me, this test seems to be too long. I'm worried that my candidates won't complete it. Don't you have a 10-question test that will do this for me? And my response is, I'd be the richest man in the world if I did. But it takes time to properly assess these things that we're talking about. And I have several companies who've kind of been enlightened about it and say that the person who won't complete the assessment is the cheapest assessment they ever buy. That person's not very dedicated to getting this particular job. Formal assessment of job fit. Several of the other speakers have talked about this in one way or another. I too use Profile XT as my primary job fit measure. The original research for this came out of Harvard starting in the 1980s, and if any of you are really interested, you can email me and I'll send you the original references. But the key is it's the kind of research that only Harvard or something like Harvard can afford to do. It was based on 16 years of longitudinal research on over 386,000 real workers. That's beyond my budget. But what was interesting for me as a researcher is that they used what I call bucket methodology. You take every possible factor you can think of, you stuff them all in the research bucket, and you try and measure them all. And they did. They had 16 major categories and about 64 total variables that they were measuring, all of which they thought might be predictive of long-term job success. Turned out only 3 worked. They looked at all this stuff. None of those worked. Only three things were consistently predicted. Thinking and communication, how people process information and share. And this isn't IQ. This is speed and manner of learning and manner of sharing. Behaviors at work. That was kind of obvious, but you got to know which behaviors are important. And finally, is this what they want to do with their lives? Because if not, they probably won't do it well, they probably won't do it long. Those are the three things that came out of all that research, millions and millions of times. And if you can consistently and accurately measure those for both the individual and the job, you can get right 3 out of 4 times. Which is a heck of a lot better for you than 1 out of 8. Let's talk about the things that are involved in deciding whether you've done perfect hiring or you're perfect hiring. These are the things everybody tends to measure. We call those two the verbs. And if you can measure all of those, you're much better off than just measuring 1 or 2. And in most cases, you can. We looked at 25 assessment studies, did a meta-analytic study, 25 cases where companies had invested in assessment programs. And there was quite a range of assessment programs. What we're looking for is a commonality, what comes out of using assessments. We found that 13 reported their ROI. The average was better than $26 per dollar investment. Again, your CFO should see that. We had 12 studies on reduction in early hire failure. The average was 46%. Again, that's a big number because that's where you spend an awful lot of your company's money in training, getting people on the job and trying to bring them up to productivity. We had 5 studies on total turnover. The average there was 47%. But in each case, they had had the program in place for at least 2 years, so you can see the effect. We had 2 on reduction in sales turnover. It was even higher. Everyone makes the assumption, at least in America, that if you can sell anything. And it's just not true. We like to say that just because someone can sell Chevrolets in Boston doesn't mean that they can sell yachts in Houston. It doesn't even mean they can sell Hondas in Boston. We had 3 on job fit assessment, reduction in turnover. The average reduction was 60%. And the ROI was 33 to 1. Two reported on sales production. One was just a 50% increase in sales per person, which is a huge number. The other one was the one I showed you that had 900% difference between top and bottom performers. 5 used multiple assessments. They used an honesty, integrity, and some form of job fit measure. The average reduction on turnover and early hire failure was 56%. Think how much easier your job would be if you only had to hire half as many people as you do now. You might again be able to do something else productive with your time. 1 used multiple assessments. Bottom line increase of 23% in net profit. Again, your CFO should see that. So this is the easy conclusion. If you use them right, and if they're good assessments, you'll get huge return on investment. And the things that you will benefit from extend well beyond the things we usually do. So if you're going to do this, now at this point, I want to see a show of hands. How many of you wish you could do this in your company? How many would like to? If I've only convinced 3 of you, I'm going home. Okay? I'm going to assume that the rest of you are simply too shy to raise your hand. That this would be a good thing for you to do in your company. Well, if so, you've got to go sell it, right? Somebody's got to spend money to get money back. So prepare your case. Number one, if you don't know what it costs now, how on earth will you make a case for it? So you've got to start collecting data if you're not collecting it. When I meet a new prospect and I'm talking about implementing an assessment program, I require them, before they get their very first assessment, to agree to give me at least 1 year's baseline data on everything that they routinely collect. And when you say that, they have no idea what they're doing. They don't know what the payroll system collects. There's all kinds of hidden data that can be mined from the average company. And generally, HR doesn't even know it's there. Require baseline data from payroll. Get a list of your hiring term dates. Simplest data in the world. They can't do that for you? Or they won't. That's why I said talk to the CFO first. Or the CEO. From your HR or hiring managers, whoever does the actual letting go, type and cause of term. Voluntary versus involuntary, and if you can get much more detailed information, obviously that would be useful. My assessments are not going to keep someone from leaving the job because they became pregnant or because their spouse moved 1,000 miles away to take a new job. But the assessments will identify a lot of other possible reasons for termination, like got caught with their hand in the till. From your CFO or your insurance providers, things that you might not be able to easily access yourself, the cost of your risk factors. These things down here are the things that keep executives awake at night. They're hidden costs of doing business, but they have usually data on it somewhere. And you may have to dig to get it. And then project that data that you have for how much you expect it to change. How much is your impact going to be? And you've got all the basis for what you might expect from that meta analytics study. And be conservative. You'll look better in the end. They should jump on this for a 5% improvement. What happens if you show them 25%? On the other hand, if you promise them 25% and produce 20, you'll look like you failed. So be conservative. And take this chart to your CFO and say, I want to pursue the first retirement. This is what I want to do. Now, obviously, if you do this, Doru can help you. Expand the pool, get online, write job postings that sell. If you don't know how to do that, get your sales department to write your job postings. Some of my most successful clients in expanding the pool have been because they finally said, I can't do it, I don't know how. But my sales department does. Tell them there's no commission on this except a better place to work. Assess everyone. That's by far the most efficient way to get you out of the job of reading 1,200 resumes. Assess everyone. You only read the resumes of the people who meet the qualifications on the assessment. And look at all those things. Then when you do your review and interview, you look for experience, which is the one thing the assessments won't give you. If that's important to you, you can find that out in the interview. And maybe they won't lie to you, but maybe they will. And then try and examine the challenges. And the job fit data will help you examine your challenges. One of the reports on the assessments that Dora's group provides identifies very specifically for the interview phase what their likely challenges are going to be in this specific job. And you can focus on that. How are they going to handle that? And finally, when you select, use all your information. You can't rely on just the assessment, even though Xerox is. Use all the information you have available to you. And that's a simple system. And I thank you for listening to it. All of our goofing off out there.
Everybody? Microphone?
Raise your hand, she's got the microphones. Do you have questions?
Thank you. Ce vreau acolo? Trebuie să vorbiți la ei.
Sunt psiholocă ca poporul și cum cred că vă așteptați să vorbesc
How do you, okay,
Just a second. It's not
go ahead, I'm sorry.
Ca să răspundeți mai concret, pentru o variabilă, în procente, cât acordați rata competitivității și cât acordați flexibilității?
In making the decision, whether you have the right person.
Pentru un angajat perfect.
Perfect, okay. The first thing is the good employee question. The first thing is the good employee question. Because if the answer to that is they're not going to be a good employee, then it doesn't matter what job you put them in. They're not going to be a good employee. Okay? If you can measure, are they going to be a good employee, and the answer is yes, then you do the job fit part. And the Profile XT is my chosen measure for job fit. You're modeling the job or the pattern, and the individual with the assessment, and you're matching the two. And you get a number, 95% match, 71% match. It's a good topic. People ask me, what percent match do you look for? I don't know. How desperate are you? In my own company, I work very hard to not hire anyone who doesn't match my job at 85%. But I have the luxury of not having to hire somebody. The call center that I talked about and the grocer, they've got to have a certain number of bodies. Their standards are 70% match for the job. But they've made the firm decision, they're not even going to interview someone who doesn't match at least 70%. If you want to understand the relationship between the percentages, we say 85% and above. Give them their tools and get out of the way. Okay? Between 70 and 85%, they can do the job, but the lower the number, the harder you're going to have to work, and the harder they're going to have to work to make them successful. Below 70%, it drops off like that. And at 50%, nobody ever worked that hard. Not you, not them. Oh, the question is how important is the honesty and integrity for someone who is good and in the right job? It's 100% of the equation.
Iar rata de
Yes. Yes.
Sylvia is my name. How would you say the care for employer branding should be reflected in the recruitment and selection process, and who should be responsible for this?
I missed the very first sentence.
How would you say the care for employer
Care for the
branding?
employer.
For the employer branding.
Care for the
Check the select.
One word. Yeah, no, your English is good, but that one
For,
word.
for the...
Just try once more. Maybe my ear trying.
Well, the image that the employer has on the market for the candidates and what it was heard about.
Okay, now I understand. Now I understand. The question is the way the employer is perceived in the community. Are they an employer of choice? Is that the question? Are they if they're an employer of choice? How does the assessment process affect that? Is that correct?
And how should we address that? Because I think it's an opportunity to enhance our image.
Absolutely. And you need to make the case in whatever you use to get the word out to your potential employee base. We care enough to make sure that we only hire good people who fit their jobs and will produce at very high levels so we can all be better. That's how you become an employer of choice. And you can use that in your recruiting advertising.
And also, I think it's linked to this idea. Besides creative, interesting ads, what other method would you say it works to attract more candidates and more valuable candidates?
People think I'm oversimplifying when I say, get them all, sort them out later, okay? But I'm really not. The number one complaint that I have from people who go online with our system is, I forgot how to turn the darn thing off and I have enough applicants. So what happens with an internet job system is that you'll post your job to some known places, maybe 10 boards. 50 other boards, we call them parasites, will come and steal those jobs and put them on their board too. Now for you as an employer, that's a good thing. There's no downside to that. If you go online and write reasonably attractive ads, you will never again worry about having enough applicants. Well, we need to look at your ads then. I'd be happy to look at your ads. Do you look at how they actually appear when they appear on the boards? Okay, because that's the critical sales part right there. And if that doesn't reach out and grab them, you'll never see them. You have a really hard job to really
Lucrezi într-o firmă de consultanță sau într-o?
Okay, but seriously, let me look at your ads and see if I can help.
Question? Another question? O altă întrebare?
Oh, it's on there.
Nu văd până acolo.
Hi, my name is Miha and I'm working as a recruitment manager in a company. And I have hired 300 persons in the last 18 months. And I'm really curious about how many applicants do you have for a job
In the U.S.?
in the U.S.?
Well, obviously, to some extent, it depends on the job and how well the ad is written. But in some jobs, like call center jobs, we'll get thousands of applicants, but they have hundreds of seats to fill.
Yeah, but the thing is that we have thousands of applicants for one job.
Right.
And if we are multiplying this with, I don't know, 10 jobs, you can imagine how many CVs we are receiving.
That's why you need the system. If you have a good online hiring system, and if you like, I can talk to you and tell you what to look for in that system, it will allow you to ask job-specific questions. If the job says you have to be able to lift 30 kilos without hurting yourself, yes or no, you can use that kind of a question to screen the applicants, and the system will do that automatically for you. So if their answer is no, I can't do that, they can't have that job. And so now you're down to half as many applicants perhaps. And you can ask 10 of those questions, and then you look at the assessments. And the assessments are going to tell you who to simply not spend a lot of time on. It's a pretty efficient system to get down from, I pity you if you were actually hand reading 1,000 applications. I feel for you deeply.
No, and the thing is that I'm not reading it myself, but somebody is doing that, so the job is there.
See, you've got the diamond cutters problem.
No, actually, we don't. I mean, we know exactly because our jobs are very, very detailed, and that means that if I'm seeing an applicant that don't have my conditions, is not fulfilling one of my conditions, of course, he's not getting through, I don't know, through the assessment.
Right, right. So,
Thank you.
but if you do combine them in layers, you can get to the bottom of that funnel much more efficiently than if you don't have those other filters.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Întrebări?
It's coming. It's coming.
It's coming. E în spatele meu.
Cauza ochelari.
Nu, dar și eu, dacă aș avea ochii la spate, aș vedea. Deci nu aveți.
În caz concret, asta mai mult așa pentru deținerea sării. Dacă ați avea în față referințe despre un informatician sau matematician de excepție, dar care își bate nevasta de 2 ori pe zi, mim acum, așa, și un alt matematician sau informatician care nu-și bate nevasta, nu e atât de brillant, strălucit în ale informaticii și matematicii. Dumneavoastră cu ea ați acordat credit și șanse.
Deci chiar întreba asta cu tare, poate rămas să nu vorbim de
I try very hard never to hire a killer. Because we may not stop at one. If you use all your information, that last step, that's part of the information. Sometimes I use animal analogies, and I say take all kinds of animals and stuff them in the top of your funnel. The first step, looking for a good employee, that's where you get rid of the snakes and the slugs. Because nobody wants to work with them. Okay? The next step, assessing for job fit, that's where the starfish have to be. Because they're very nice, they're colorful, but they don't do any of the things we need. They don't swim, they don't run, they don't fly. So the starfish, even though we like them, they have to go. Finally, when you get to the information you're talking about, that's when the porcupines leave, or hedgehogs, because they're prickly to work with.
Thank you very much.
Dacă nu mai sunt alte întrebări. Okay, thank you very much, John. Thank you.